Fresh divisions replaced the shattered units. Fresh commanders took up the reins. Fresh plans were drawn up. The Battle of the Somme would go on, as Verdun had gone on. The British might be unskillful, but they were dogged, and they could learn. They attacked again. On July the 3rd, General von Below, commanding the German Second Army, issued an order of the day.
The decisive issue of the war depends on the victory of the Second Army on the Somme. We must win this battle. The important ground lost in certain places will be recaptured. For the present, the chief thing is to hold on to our positions at any cost. I forbid the voluntary evacuation of trenches. The enemy should have to carve his way over heaps of corpses.
July the 11th was the 142nd day of the Battle of Verdun. On that day, General von Falkenhayn, the German Chief of Staff, ordered a strict defensive at Verdun. This much, at least, of what the British Army had set out to do had been accomplished. The Somme remained. Now there was the great question whether Britain's new army, Kitchener's barely trained, inexperienced volunteers, could rise above their bloody losses, swallow the bitter pill of failure, and still beat the finest army in the world, the immensely courageous, professional troops of Germany, in their well-prepared positions. A fortnight had passed since the great catastrophe, yet already a difference was seen. Now these same new army soldiers, the same keen but ignorant young officers, under the same unskilled staffs, were going to try one of the most difficult operations of war, a night assembly on the battlefield and a dawn attack. On the night of July the 13th, 6 brigades were assembled on tapes laid in no man's land and formed up, sometimes as near as 200 yards to the German trenches.
All the time I was saying to myself, you're there, boy. Right in the middle of no man's land and no one can see you. You're going to get away with it. Right up under the barrage, into Jerry's trenches before he knows it. Smiling away to myself as if I was daft. I felt it. We really might get away with it.
At 3:20 a.m. on July the 14th, the British barrage crashed out at full intensity. 5 minutes later, it lifted from the German front line, and the waiting troops rushed in. The success was complete. A French liaison officer reported, "They dared, they won." This was a very different matter from July the 1st. The new army was beginning to learn. For a brief moment, fresh hope rose. The impatient cavalry, massed behind the front of every battle, waiting for the breakthrough which never came, moved up to the front.
One or two guards, as they walked by, they shouted out, "When are you bastards coming up here?" So we said, "We'll be up there, mate, don't worry." Then a Scotchman come along and he says, "When are you going to get cracking?" So we shouted out, "We'll be up there just the same, don't worry."
But this was the Somme, 1916, with the German army at the peak of its powers. The machine guns were still there. The counterattacks beat in. Now the full meaning of General von Bellow's order was going to declare itself.
The enemy should have to carve his way over heaps of corpses.
Now, as the British began to make some progress, the pattern of the battle emerged. The Germans counterattacked to seize back every British gain, sometimes several times in one day, often successfully. Then another British attack would be mounted to win the ground again. And so it went on. Every inch of these uplands suffered the desolation of shell fire. Every inch was soaked with British and German blood. Now the time of endurance began. Now the whole British army strained to the battle as the whole French army had strained to Verdun. For a week in July, the South Africans held Delville Wood. When they came out of it, they numbered 750 men out of 3,000, 29 officers out of 121. The Australian 1st Division captured Pozières at a cost of 5,000 men.
Well, without doubt, Pozières was the heaviest, bloodiest, rottenest stunt that ever the Australians were caught up in. The carnage is just indescribable. And we were making our attack after the 3rd Brigade had gone through, that we were literally walking over the dead bodies of our cobbers.
The unceasing roar of the Somme bombardments could be heard and felt on the quiet sectors. Sometimes it could even be heard in England. Division by division, the British were drawn into the battle, replacing shattered, exhausted formations, until one by one they were exhausted themselves.
We were living like wild animals, and in fact we became wild animals. The farther we moved up to the front line, we found ourselves scrounging for food, water, robbing dead people if they'd got any rations on them. And as we heard of the next stunt ahead, we felt a shiver of exultation running through us in the knowledge that soon again, with rifle, bayonet and Mills bomb, we would be getting at the stinking bastards that killed our mates.
Dear Louise and children, my darlings, the gods only know if I am writing for the last time. We have now been 2 days in the front trenches. We get nothing to eat or drink, and life is almost unendurable. Here, I have given up hope of life. There really is no possibility that we shall see each other again.
6 German divisions faced the British on July the 1st. By July the 16th, 14 divisions had entered the battle. By the end of July, 18. By the end of August, 30. The cost of learning to make war in the face of the German army was frightening. By the beginning of August, the British had lost 6,000 officers, nearly 120,000 men. The British people had little sense of what was happening. War correspondents at the beginning, on July the 1st, shared the universal ignorance. One of them reported to his newspaper,
"The attack which was launched today began well. It is not yet a victory, for victory comes at the end of a battle, and this is only a beginning. But our troops, fighting with very splendid valor, have swept across the enemy's front trenches along a great part of the line of attack. And so, after the first day of battle, we may say, it is, on balance, a good day for England and France. It is a day of promise in this war."
Yet the promise did not seem to be fulfilled. There were no satisfying leaps forward of pins on maps, just the endless repetition of the same place names: Beaumont Hamel, Thiepval, Contalmaison, Guillemont, and the rest. And each day the newspapers began to teach the nation the grim truths of war as the army was learning them in the field. The Sheffield Telegraph announced by degrees the fate of its local battalion, the York and Lancasters.